Oh hey, welcome back to the library, and if you're new, what's up? Today we're talking about a bit of a doozy. A divisive book that has separated the internet into two parties. Either general hate for it or love. I don't know, some people really like this book. Love might be too strong of a term. I'm not in either party. I'm leaning towards not liking, but I'm in the middle. Big mid book. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is a book about many things, so warning, themes of suicide, grief, death, all those things. But I promise you that going forth with this, even if you have problems with topics like that, it's more of gonna be jest and in fun. I'm gonna be making fun of this book and praising it for the few things in my opinion it gets right. I'll be the devil's advocate, but what I actually feel for this book is complete ambivalence toward. Ambivalence is too strong of a word. I'm less ambivalent and more just, it missed on so many marks. It's very much a product of 2020, a product of its time, but we'll get into all of that. My main thing before we get into it is that it treats you, the reader, like an idiot, like a stupid idiot, like a fool. Our main lady, Nora Seed, we follow through her life. Actually, we get first a flashback. She's at school, I think high school, yeah, she's 17, playing chess with Mrs. Elm, her librarian. It details the day where her father died, and it shoots forward in time to her cat dying. Voltaire of the Candide. This guy, Ash, who will come up later, walks up to her door and lets her know that her cat is in the street and dead. So that's how we get introduced to our character, more or less. And it says when this chapter starts, and for many of the beginning chapters that were 24, 19, however many hours from her deciding to die. And that, for me, seems like the book treating us, the reader, like we can't comprehend that her life is kind of going downhill. Like she might not be enjoying this. Like we didn't buy this book for the premise of in between life and death library, reliving all your lives. Like that's why we got the book, and that's interesting. I will say the premise of this book, the first praise I will give it, is that the premise is so interesting. That idea of the library in limbo, where you go in between life and death. And obviously there's gonna be spoilers, so, stop when you want to in this video. But I mean, this book will help some people for sure, those who don't look too deeply into it, but genuinely it's, I don't know. That idea, the theme of, or not the theme, the premise of a library, a limbo-esque library. It's kind of in between life and death, but you're not dead. It's not really limbo. It's complicated. But a section in between time and space where you get to kind of reap the rewards of string theory and alternate dimensions and so on and so forth. What a cool idea. Too bad it's not really that well done. Like I said, we get introduced to her in high school. 19 years later is when we find out that Voltaire is dead. And then the next day, she goes to work at String Theory, this music store that she's worked at for 19 years, and she gets fired. We also learn along the way that her father died probably because she quit swimming when she was 17. Her mother died at some point right before her wedding with a man named Dan, who will also come up later. And then she left that wedding with Dan to go spend time with her dying mother, and then had to basically give up on the wedding altogether because Dan is a loser. We'll get to that, though. I mean, this book did make me hate people very well. It's just too bad it made me not like pretty much anybody except for a few minor characters who didn't have a lot of screen time or page time. You get it? But continuing the speed round, we learn about the fallout with her brother and this guy named Ravi, where they were in a band and she quit, and so her brother probably holds a lot of resentment to her for that. She misses a piano lesson she has with this kid, and it seems like those parents are going to quit on her because of that. She misses out taking care of her elderly neighbor, and that weighs heavy on her. And she thinks about how she never really succeeded at much in her life, and she decides to die. She makes like really, really strange, in my opinion, Instagram posts that seems like what somebody who has never really dealt with depression would interpret somebody's cry for help as, you know what I mean? Like the words that they hear, not the ones that they read, if that makes any sense. Cry for help, but it sounds not real at all. I'm coming from this, so you know, as somebody who has depression. I am coming from the opinion of somebody who's grown up most of their life with depression. This isn't me going, hey, feel bad for me. No, I'm letting you know this so that you can understand where I'm coming from, where I'm reading this book. My depression's got the best of me for sure, but I can also not at all understand why somebody would write a post like that. It was so, like, direct, but not in the right way at all. It kind of goes back to that part that I hate where the book kind of treats you like a fool, like a little idiot who can't understand that maybe she's doing a cry for help. So the writer, Matt Haig, has to write it out for you, basically, which doesn't make any sense to me. Like the idea with the chapters of them telling you every few minutes that she's gonna decide to die in a couple hours. You don't have to tell us that. It ruins the progression of the story, in my opinion. But after she makes that post, she decides to die. And she's instantly transported to the Midnight Library. Some more praise I want to get out of the way. Even though the Midnight Library idea is not very well fleshed out or executed, I do like the description of it, of the never-ending kind of conveyor belt of books, the strangely high ceiling, the lights all hanging from suspended wires, not really supported by anything, the loss of an entrance, you know, it's very dreamlike, and I do like that, but I don't much enjoy the execution, which we'll get into now. The librarian at this library is or isn't Mrs. Elm, but it looks like Mrs. Elm. Obviously, it all kind of takes place in Nora's head, so it's not Mrs. Elm, but it looks like her. Mrs. Elm describes a lot of times how the Midnight Library works, and it's that she gets to pick a book from the shelf and it will lessen the regrets in the book of regrets. She gives her this book that tells her all of her regrets. It's a very long book, and it's very heavy, and it hurts a lot. And the book, basically the idea and the main theme of the book is regrets, which I do like that being the theme for a book about a topic like this. Your regrets being kind of subjective, and you working on those is a very good idea, and toying with the idea of your regrets and breaking them down piece by piece for yourself, but I don't like it in this way. So like, that's a little bit of praise. Like the theme is a good idea. The execution though is just, between every life she has to pick a new life, an idea. She goes like, well, what if I married Dan? You know, for instance, all of those things I told you about are lives that she then tries to live and tries out. And she's promised, when she tries out these lives from Mrs. Elm, that she will pick one to live in for forever, if it really stick. I think that's a lie. That makes no sense to me. Like, you can see the end of this book coming from a mile away, and to me, that is a criticism. If you can just see how the book's gonna end, what's the point of reading it? And I was right, like to a T what the ending was gonna be. She's not gonna be able to pick one of these lives to live in. She's, you know, all of that. But the first life she picks, she decides, what if I married Dan and we got a pub together on the English countryside? And it turns out that it wasn't great. Most of these lives are bad for one reason or another, and that's a fair and real description of what would happen. Like, Dan kind of sucked from the description she gave us. He gave up on her for missing the wedding for her mother's death. Yeah, that's stupid. But he cheated on her in this life. He's distant. He's, like, they get the pub and everything, and she lives that life. String theory means there's an infinite number of universes, and you can pick between each one, and anything you can possibly think of has happened before, so she did get a pub in one life with Dan. And it turns out she was a little more healthy physically, but she looked more tired and old than she actually was. But she was 35, by the way. She seems not very grown up for a 35-year-old. Like, the writing style for a 35-year-old seems childlike to me personally, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know. It just doesn't match a 35-year-old in my understanding of that, but I could be very wrong. But yeah, she realizes that Dan sucks and she was right to never marry him. And when she has that thought, she is shucked out of that life back into the Midnight Library. And it feels like every time she goes back to this library, she's like, well, why am I even doing this? And then Mrs. Elm has to say the same thing of, it's about your book of regrets and figuring it out and finding the life for you. But it feels like she has to say that every time. One of the biggest disconnects I had is that this woman she either has a master's or some high degree in philosophy. She's smart. All right, and she doesn't act like it. It doesn't make any sense that it's like, oh, even though you've described this to me 7 times and I understand it completely and I think about it all the time, I have to ask you what I'm still doing here, even though I'm a philosophy major. Not to put too much heft in a philosophy major, but like, you go to school to learn about human thought for 4 years, you're gonna be like, oh, like, I have all these things I can do. There's an infinite number of possibilities. I can try them all out. It doesn't make any sense, her train of thought sometimes. The author, Matt Haig, tries to write her like she has a history of being a very smart person, and then writes her like a fool. And that doesn't make any sense to me. She got through 4 years of philosophy school, and then she comes back every time to Mrs. Elm just like, hey, so why am I still doing this? Every time. I'll explain it better after we go through some more of the lives. She does one where she went through with swimming. She kept at it. She became an Olympian, and she's 35. It's always 35, right? It's always called the Midnight Library because time doesn't change. So it takes the time of her death and starts her from there. So sometimes she wakes up in the morning, sometimes she's still awake at midnight, sometimes here and there. In one of them, she's a 35-year-old ex-Olympian who is giving a speech, and her brother's still around and part of her life, But instead of her dad dying when she's young, her mother died when her father had an affair. And like, it always shows that no matter what you did, you were always the problem. Like, I don't think that that was the point. I do like this. Here, let me give him his flowers a little bit. That depression is part of you. It doesn't just leave you when you make different decisions in your life, okay? If you have depression as a kid and you grow up, even with success of being an Olympian, you're still gonna be a person with depression. It's not just gonna evaporate like that. I do like that. But it also implies that, like, no matter what she did, she was always gonna be sad. And that's a little strange to me. It's not as bad as some of the transgressions in this book, but that's a little weird. There's the band life where she stuck it out with her brother and Ravi in the band, and they kept at it and became multinational musicians who are favored by many, okay? She has, 1.7 million followers on Instagram or something like that. Again, using that as a metric for like fame and stuff, it kind of puts you out of it a little bit. Like, it roots you in the timeline. He's always talking about, the author's always talking about Netflix and Instagram and Facebook and followers and my phone. Like, it's, you know, I do like books a lot. This is more of a personal gripe. I do like books a lot that take place in an ambiguous time where it could all kind of happen in the modern era, but not so much like right now. Right, you know, so, but that's a personal thing for me. That's not a genuine criticism of the book. But in this life, she learns that her pursuing of the band life led to her brother overdosing, and that strips her out of that world, you know? So something always comes up, and it really racks her brain. You know, she goes through, I think it's described over like 50 different lives she's gone through. The one I want to deep dive into, though, is the one where she becomes a glaciologist, somebody who studies climate change and glaciers and the North. And in this specific life, I don't want to go too much into it, but she's put on watch, polar bear watch to be specific. And when she's out there, a polar bear shows up, and she's told to bang the saucepan with the ladle to make noise, to shoot the flare into the air, right? And she eventually, while scaring off this bear, while fearing for her life, in the book, she realizes, oh, I want to live, right in the midst of wanting to die. And I've seen a lot of people online kind of criticize this, like, this is a terrible metaphor of, like, fearing for your life doesn't make you want to live. Hold on. If instead, one thing was changed, and it was the success of fighting for your life, of driving the polar bear off, right? And after that happens, she feels this reward of fighting for herself. That would have been a good metaphor, but that's not what happened. Instead, it was just, oh, I'm scared right now. Is this what it feels like to want to live? No. I did not like that comparison at all. I thought that was shallow is too kind. Like, it was just this close to being a good metaphor, but then it was acres off. And again, she comes back to the Midnight Library, and Mrs. Elm is like, hey, you're getting rid of more regrets. Don't you feel good about that? And she's like, what am I even doing this for? Anyways, let me go into the next lot. You know, it feels like that happens every time, and I would be happier about this book if the conflict between her and Mrs. Elm was a little more like going through the 5 stages of grief, because I feel like that's kind of in your face that she's going through the 5 stages of grief of herself throughout this, but it's both too in your face and too inaccurate for me to actually give that any merit. Like, if instead, every time she came back to Mrs. Elm, she was going through another stage of grief, that would be interesting. But instead, it's the same thing of whether it's indecisiveness or confusion or anger, whatever it is, she's got something, but it feels the same. In the conclusion of the book, she goes to live a life with that Ash guy I talked about. She apparently gave up on a coffee date with him at one point because she was dating Dan at that point in time, but she says, what if I wasn't? What if I went on that coffee date with Ash? And this is where the book gets a lot of genuine, very hearty criticism, in my opinion, where she shows up in this life and she has a kid with this Ash guy, and that fixes her. But I think in a book about suicide, self-harm, depression, making it like, hey, if you had a kid and a husband, you'd be happy, that's not even correct or truthful. Like, even if it was, like, it's not, you know? Like, anybody with depression will know that just having more to keep up with kind of takes away from your ability to help yourself grow and change. Instead, it's like, well, no, if you just had a kid, you'd be happy. I see a lot of criticism about this book, like, it's conservative self-help of just have a kid, woman. And like, I get that. I do think that that was a little crazy. I will give a little bit of give, you know? I just think that that's really unrealistic and stupid. If instead the conclusion was, oh, I just need to work on myself, be proud of myself, be happy with myself, push forward. Like, I like the idea of the end of this book of you are potential. As a human, you are unchained potential. You can be anything, you can do anything with some restraint. Obviously, I just like that theme, but instead of her finding it because in one life I had a kid and I was happy, like, that's, no, not really. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Instead, if it was, none of these lives worked for me, wait, maybe I am potential and important, instead of, oh, I could have a kid, I am in potential and I'm important, you know? Some of the main themes, if they were just done correctly, would have been really good, but instead they were shallow, treated you like you were stupid, and overall wrong. Overall, I think I would rate this book a hefty, and I'm using Fable now instead of Goodreads, so if you want to, instead of Goodreads, because you can actually do a real rating, and the rating I gave was a 1.75. I gave a 1.75 out of 5, and that's because there is some merit to the creation of this book, okay? The idea, the themes, the execution is just where this book goes, whoa, that's them swinging and missing. The overall construction of this book's foundation is strong in my opinion. It's just that it falls apart on every other aspect. So that 1.75 is all just the foundation. It treats you like you're stupid. It is kind of wrong about everything. And it misses the mark just by a hair or a ballpark on everything. Yeah, I just think that somebody else out there needs to write this premise, because a book about suicide and self-harm and grappling with that and going to some place in between life and death and experiencing your life through different lenses and then coming to terms with your own life, like that progression is super cool and a great idea. It's just done terribly. So, if you like this new style of video where I go over one book, okay, I can make these videos more often because it's just one book. I can read books relatively quickly. If you like this, let me know. Okay? Let me know. I kind of liked this. So, thank you so much for being here. If you made it all the way to the end, you're obligated to subscribe. And let me know what you're reading right now. I would love to know. That's literally why I make this. I want to get people into reading. I want to hear about what people are reading. I want recommendations. People, let me know. And thank you for being here. Go read a book. Bye-bye.